Get comfortable. Turn the lights down, settle into whatever position you plan to stay in, and let the day you just had start to loosen its grip. Tonight, we are going to New York City, and we are going there in the year 1884. You have seen a version of this city before. Almost everyone has. It is the version that shows up in paintings and in film, the one with the gaslight throwing soft rings onto wet cobblestone, carriages pulling up under stone porticos, a woman in dark silk stepping down onto a swept sidewalk, while a man in a tall hat holds the door of a brownstone open behind her. There is a dinner somewhere in that picture, 8 courses of it, and a butler, and a house with a name attached to the family who built it. That version of 1884 New York is real. It existed. There were perhaps a few hundred families living inside it. There were more than 1 million people living in the city that year, and the overwhelming majority of them woke up somewhere else entirely. So that is not where we are going. Tonight, you are not stepping down from a carriage. Tonight, you are waking up in a dark room on the 4th floor of a rear tenement on Orchard Street, in the part of the city that everyone downtown simply calls the neighborhood. And the first thing you will do today, before the sun is up, before you have eaten anything, is calculate. You will calculate all day. That is the part the postcards leave out, and it is the part we are going to spend the next couple of hours inside. If you enjoy these, it genuinely helps to subscribe, and I always like reading where people are listening from and what time it is where you are. Leave a comment if you feel like it. Then let it go, and let the room go soft, because we are going back now. It is the middle of March, and it is a little before 5 in the morning. The room is not entirely dark, but the light in it is not really light. It is the grey that comes down the air shaft and through one window, and it arrives already used, having been handed down past 3 floors of other people's windows before it reaches you. The air is cold and slightly wet. Coal smoke has settled into everything you own, so thoroughly that you stopped smelling it years ago, and only notice it now when somebody from outside the neighborhood comes in, and their nose wrinkles before they can stop it. Under the smoke there is damp plaster, and under that, faintly, the yard. Above you, someone is already moving. You know the sound of that floor the way you know the sound of your own children breathing. A chair leg dragged, then 2 steps, then the iron scrape of a stove lid being lifted. The family up there has a man who works the fish market and leaves before you do, which means that scrape is your clock. You do not own a clock. There is one in the front room of the building across the yard. And if the window is open in summer, you can sometimes hear it strike. But in March, the windows are shut, and you go by the man upstairs, and the light in the shaft, and the sound of the first horse-car bell coming faint off the avenue. You are 29 years old. Your husband is asleep beside you, and he will be awake in about 4 minutes, because he wakes when you get up whether you want him to or not. He is a cigar maker. He works in a shop on Rivington Street, where about 30 men and women sit at long benches stripping and rolling, and he has done this since he was 19, and his hands smell of tobacco in a way that soap does not touch. When your youngest was born, the smell was the first thing she reached for. There are 3 children. The oldest is 9, a girl, and she is lying at the foot of the bed, under the same quilt as her brother, who is 6. The youngest is not quite 1, and she sleeps in a drawer that has been taken out of the bureau and set on 2 chairs, lined with a folded blanket, which is a completely ordinary arrangement, and which you would not think to describe as anything at all if someone had not once written it down and made it sound remarkable. The apartment is 2 rooms. There is this room, which has the bed and the bureau and the drawer, and there is the front room, which has the stove and the table and the window onto the air shaft, and at night a border. The whole thing together measures a little under 300 square feet. 6 people are inside it right now. You have been in New York for 11 years. You came at 18. Your husband came the year after, from a town 70 miles from yours, though you did not meet until you were both already here, and both already working. You have moved 3 times, each time within about 4 blocks, and each move has been sideways, rather than upward in every way that could be measured, except one, which is that this building has a hydrant in the yard, rather than at the end of the street. Now, before you swing your legs out from under that quilt, we should stop, because there is something about this morning that almost everyone gets backwards, and if it is not said plainly at the start, it will quietly distort everything else you see today. The great fiction of this era, stated over and over in newspapers and sermons and the annual reports of charitable societies, is that poverty is a condition of character, that it arrives because of drink or idleness or a failure of thrift or an unwillingness to save. The reformers who will walk through this building in a few years, notebooks in hand, will genuinely believe that the central question worth asking about you is whether you are deserving. They will look for evidence of your habits. They will note whether the floor is swept, and whether there is beer in the room, and whether the children are clean. And from these observations, they will attempt to determine the cause of your circumstances. They will be looking at the wrong thing entirely. The cause of your circumstances is arithmetic. A cigar maker in New York in 1884, working full weeks in a good shop, earns somewhere in the range of $10 to $12 a week. That is a decent wage for the trade. It is not a poor wage, but the trade does not offer full weeks. It is seasonal. It is subject to strikes and to lockouts, and to the sudden arrival of cheaper labor working out of tenement rooms 4 blocks away. And across a whole year, a man in that trade might work 40 weeks, or 35, or in a bad year, considerably fewer. Your rent on these 2 rooms is about $10 a month. Coal, food, clothing, and the small unavoidable costs of 6 people living in 300 square feet consume every remaining cent, and then a little more, and the little more is what the corner grocer keeps in his book. There is no arrangement of thrift that closes that gap. There is no amount of sweeping. Which brings us to the second half of the fiction. And this is the half that concerns you most directly. In 1884, if a census taker climbs these stairs and knocks on this door and asks who in the household is employed, the honest and expected answer is one person: your husband. He has an employer, a shop, a wage paid in coin on a Saturday. He is, in the language of the forms and the reports and the wage surveys, a worker. You are recorded as keeping house, and in about 90 minutes, when the light in the shaft has gone from grey to slightly less grey, You will sit down at the table in the front room with your 9-year-old daughter and begin work that will occupy most of your waking hours until well after dark. And that work will produce actual money, delivered to actual contractors. And it will appear in no survey and no census column and no report, because there is no employer standing behind it in a way anyone knows how to write down. That is the structure. Hold on to it, because it is going to explain almost everything else. The labor is real, the money it earns is real, and in a bad month, it is the only money there is. What does not exist is the category. There is no word on any official document in this city for what you do, and so the work simply happens in a room with no name attached to it, day after day, for decades. And then it is gone. None of which is on your mind at 5 in the morning in March. What is on your mind is the stove and the water, and whether there is enough bread from yesterday to get everyone out the door before you have to go down to the street. So you move. The cold takes the breath out of you for a second when you come out from under the quilt, and you stand still for that second in the dark, with your feet on floorboards that are gritty no matter how often you scrub them, because the grit comes up through the boards from the building itself. The baby has not stirred. The 6-year-old is turned over. Your daughter is awake. You can tell by her breathing, but she has not moved yet, and you let her have another minute, because she will be at the table with you all day, and there is nothing waiting for her that requires her to be up first. Behind you, your husband says something short and unclear into the pillow, which is what he says every morning. And then he sits up. You reach for the shawl on the hook by the door, because it is the first thing you touch every day of your life, and you put it around your shoulders in the dark, and the day begins. The shawl is wool, and it was brown once. It is a color now that has no name, the color that wool becomes when it has been worn every day for 6 years and washed perhaps 40 times in that period, which is not often because washing wool ruins it, and everyone knows this. It has been mended at the shoulder, where the weight of a bucket handle rubs, and at the hem where you stepped on it coming up the stairs in the dark, and along one edge where a spark from the stove found it. You did all 3 repairs yourself, and you did the shoulder one twice. This shawl does the work that a coat would do, if you owned a coat. You do not. Very few women in this building own a coat. A coat is a garment made for one purpose, and a garment made for one purpose is a luxury, because it sits idle most of the time. A shawl covers your head in rain, your shoulders in cold, the baby in either, the table when there is nothing else to put down, and your lap in the evening when the fire has gone low and the coal is being conserved. It costs a fraction of a coat, and it never has to fit anyone. You dress in the dark by touch, and the order never changes. The chemise you slept in stays on. Over it a corset, which is not the tight-laced apparatus of the illustrations, but a plain thing of cotton coutil, with a few bones in it, worn because it supports your back through a day of lifting and bending, and because a woman who goes out without one is understood immediately by every other woman on the block to have given up. Then a petticoat. Then a skirt of dark wool, heavy, unfashionable, in cut by uptown standards, and entirely correct by the standards of Orchard Street. Then a waist, which is what you call the blouse. Then the apron, which is the only garment you own more than 2 of, because the apron is the thing that receives the day's damage on behalf of everything underneath it. Here is a number worth sitting with. A woman of your class in this city, in this decade, would typically own 2 dresses. Not 2 dozen, 2. 1 for every day, and 1 better one, which is not fined by any standard, but is unpatched and is kept for church or synagogue, funerals, a wedding, and appearing before anyone with authority over your circumstances. If a woman owns 3, it is because 1 is worn past repair and has not yet been cut up for something else. Beneath that, she owns perhaps 2 chemises, 2 petticoats, 3 or 4 aprons, a shawl, and 1 pair of boots. And the boots are the most expensive single thing on her body, and the thing she thinks about most, because when boots fail, there is no substitute for them. And risoling costs money you have already committed elsewhere. Ready-made clothing exists now, and this is fairly new. You could buy a woman's skirt on Division Street for something in the neighborhood of $1.25, and a cheap ready-made dress for $2 or a little more. And this is what makes the sweatshops of this neighborhood run. But you make your own, or rather, you make some, and remake others, because $1.25 is most of a day's total household earnings, and cloth by the yard is cheaper than cloth already assembled. Wool cloth might run you 30 or 40 cents a yard, calico a good deal less. Nothing is thrown away. A dress that fails at the elbow becomes a dress with a different sleeve. When it fails past that, the good sections come out of it and become a child's garment, and the rest becomes patching, and the last of it becomes rags, and the rags either scrub the floor or go to the rag man for a few cents a pound. Cloth in this apartment has a career. You put on the boots last, sitting on the edge of the bed, and you lace them by feel. Then you take the bucket. The door of your apartment opens onto a hallway about 3 feet wide, unlit, because the gas jet at the end of it is lit only in the evening, and sometimes not then. You know the hallway by its geography. 4 doors on your floor. A turn to the left, then the stairs, which are wooden, which are worn into a curve in the center of every tread, and which are steep in the way that stairs are steep, when the man who built them was paid by the apartment, and not by the comfort. You go down 4 flights, with an empty bucket in one hand, and the other hand on the wall, and on the way you pass 3 other women, doing the same thing in the other direction. And none of you says much, because it is 5 in the morning, and this is not a social occasion. This is worth slowing down for, because the building you are walking down through is a specific invention with a specific date on it, and understanding the building explains most of your day. Your building is what people call a dumbbell tenement. It is called that because the floor plan, looked at from above, is narrow in the middle and wide at both ends, like a dumbbell, and it has that shape because of a law. In 1879, the state passed a Tenement House Act requiring that every habitable room have a window opening to the outside air. Before that law, the interior rooms of a tenement had no windows at all, and a family could live for years in a room that never saw daylight and never received a change of air. The law was a reform. The builders responded to the reform by pinching the middle of the building inward on both sides, so that when 2 buildings stood side by side, as they always did, the pinched sections formed a shaft between them, running from the ground to the roof, and every interior room got a window onto that shaft. That shaft is what your window faces. It is perhaps 5 feet across. It admits a grey light for a few hours around midday, and nothing much the rest of the time. It carries every sound made in the 20 apartments that open onto it, and every smell, and in summer it carries heat upward like a chimney. Tenants throw refuse into it because it is easier than carrying refuse down 4 flights, and at the bottom of it there is a drift of things nobody will remove until somebody complains loudly enough. This is the reform. It is genuinely better than what it replaced. The building is 25 feet wide, because that is the width of a standard city lot, and about 85 feet deep, and it stands 5 or 6 stories. On each floor there are 4 apartments, and an apartment is 2 rooms, and in some buildings the rear apartments get 3. 2 rooms means a front room of perhaps 11 feet by 12, and a back bedroom smaller than that, 7 feet by 8 or 9, a room that fits a bed and almost nothing else. Into that you fit your family of 5, and the border in the front, and everyone's clothing, and the stove, and the table where the work happens, and the coal, and the water. 4 apartments on a floor, 5 floors, 20 families in a building on a lot 25 feet wide. And your building is a rear building, which means there is another one exactly like it, standing in front of yours, between you and the street. And the 2 of them share the same lot, 40 families then, on a piece of ground you could walk across in 8 seconds. Nobody set out to do this. It was done one reasonable decision at a time by men who owned land and wanted a return on it, in a city where 250,000 people were arriving every year, and the arithmetic of it worked out to this. At the bottom of the stairs you come out into the yard, which is the strip of open ground between the front building and the rear one, and this is where the water is and where the privies are. There is a hydrant, or in some buildings a pump, and it serves everyone. There is no water above the ground floor. Not on your floor, not on any floor. Every drop of water that comes into your apartment is carried up by a person, and that person is you, or your daughter, or occasionally your husband, if he is home, and the load is heavy. There is a line at the hydrant, even at this hour, and the line is entirely women, and it moves in silence. Now do the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is the day. A bucket holds a bit over 2 gallons and weighs about 20 pounds full. You need water for coffee and cooking, which is perhaps a bucket. You need water for washing the children's faces and hands, and your own, which is another. You need water for cleaning up after each meal, which is 2 more across the day. On the days you wash clothes, which is 1 full day a week and part of a second, you need 8 or 10 buckets, sometimes more, and every one of them comes up 4 flights in your 2 hands, and every one of them goes back down again as dirty water, because there is no drain in your apartment either. Wastewater goes down the stairs the same way clean water came up. Call it 5 or 6 round trips on an ordinary day. Call it 15 on a washing day. 4 flights each way. You are carrying 20 pounds of water up roughly 50 steps, 6 times before the day has properly started. And you have done this every day for 11 years. And you will do it every day for as long as you live in a building like this one. And the day the family moves to an apartment with a tap on the landing will be one of the most significant improvements in the material conditions of your life. And no one will write it down anywhere. You fill the bucket. The water comes cold and hard and smells faintly of the pipe. You shift the handle to the crook of your fingers rather than the palm, because the palm is where the callus splits. And you start back up, and the weight of it pulls your shoulder down and sets the whole rhythm of your walk. And you count the landings without meaning to. At the top, the door is open a hand's width, and there is a smell of cold ash coming out of it. And inside, your daughter is standing at the stove with the shovel already in her hand, waiting for water. She has done the ash already, or most of it, and that is worth something to you this morning. The grate has been raked, and the clinker pulled out and set in a tin pail by the door, and the fine grey dust that always rises when you do it is still hanging in the air of the room, catching the light from the air shaft window in a way that would be pretty somewhere else. You set the bucket down. You take the shovel from her and put a double handful of paper into the firebox. Then the splinters of wood you keep in a wooden crate under the bed. Then the coal on top of it. Small pieces first, the way you learned from your mother, and she learned from hers. The coal is anthracite, hard coal from Pennsylvania, and it is slow to catch and slow to die, which is exactly the quality you want in a stove that has to heat 2 rooms, cook 3 meals, boil the wash water, and warm the flat irons, all from the same firebox. You light it. The paper goes up fast and bright, and for a few seconds the whole room is orange, and then it settles into the low, steady work of the coal catching, and the stove begins to tick as the iron expands. That stove is the single most valuable object you own. It cost somewhere between $8 and $15 new, depending on the make, and yours was not new. It came with the apartment, more or less, in the sense that the previous tenant could not carry it down the stairs and did not have anywhere to put it, and your husband gave him $2 for it and considered it a good day's business. If it cracked tomorrow, you would have to replace it before you replaced almost anything else in the room, before boots, before a mattress, before the winter coat you have been not buying for 2 seasons. Breakfast is bread and coffee. It is bread and coffee most mornings, and it will be bread and coffee tomorrow. The bread is a rye loaf bought yesterday from the baker on the corner, dense and dark and heavy in the hand, and it is a day old, which is deliberate, because day-old bread is cheaper, and because fresh bread disappears faster. You cut it thin. You spread it with drippings saved from Sunday, the fat poured off the meat and kept in a cup on the shelf, and there is a little salt in it, and it is genuinely good. And every person in this room would eat twice what they are given if there were twice as much. The coffee is not entirely coffee. It is coffee stretched with chicory, and some weeks it is chicory stretched with coffee. And there is a burnt grain preparation sold in packets that you have used more than once and will use again. It goes into the pot with the water and boils, and you settle the grounds with a splash of cold water at the end, and it comes out strong and bitter and hot, and the heat is at least half of the point of it. The numbers behind that breakfast are worth setting down plainly, because the whole shape of your life sits on them. In New York, in the middle of the 1880s, a pound of rye bread costs you around 4 cents, and a large loaf around 5 or 6. Butter, good butter, runs between 25 and 35 cents a pound, which is why you are eating drippings. Eggs move with the season, roughly 18 cents a dozen in the summer when the hens are laying, and twice that in the depth of winter. Milk is about 6 or 7 cents a quart. Coffee, the real thing, is around 20 to 25 cents a pound, and chicory is a fraction of that. And this is the arithmetic that explains the pot on your stove. Potatoes come by the peck rather than the pound, and a peck runs somewhere around 20 cents, sometimes less at the end of a market day. Herring, salted in a barrel, is a few cents each, and a salt herring will flavor a pot of potatoes for a family of 5, and is one of the great quiet workhorses of the immigrant kitchen in this city. Meat, real meat, a cut of beef from the butcher, is 12 to 18 cents a pound for the parts you would want, and 8 to 10 for the parts you actually buy. The shin and the flank and the neck, the pieces that require 4 hours of simmering and reward it. Coal you buy by the scuttle or the small basket rather than by the ton. And this is the first thing to understand about being poor in this city. A ton of anthracite delivered to a cellar costs a household something in the neighborhood of $5 or $6, which works out to a very reasonable price per pound. You cannot buy a ton. You have nowhere to put a ton, and you have never had $5 sitting idle in your hand at one time. So you buy it from the corner dealer in a basket, 12 or 15 cents at a time, and at that rate you are paying something close to double what the man in the brownstone pays for the identical coal from the identical mine. Now set that against a wage. Your husband is a cigar maker, and a skilled cigar maker in a shop in this city, working by the piece in a good week, brings home somewhere between $10 and $14. That is a good week. That assumes he is working 6 days, that the shop has orders, that the season is with him and not against him, and that he is a first-rate hand, which he is. In a bad week, in the slack months, it is 6 or 7. In a week, when the shop closes, it is nothing at all. And the shop closing is not an unusual event. It is a feature of the trade. Rent on these 2 rooms is $10 a month, sometimes $11. That is roughly a quarter of what comes into the household in a good month and closer to half in a poor one. It is due to the agent in cash, and the agent is not interested in the state of the cigar trade. So the sum on the table in front of you is this. Something like $40 or $50 a month coming in from every source combined, and out of it 10 or 11 for rent, and $1 to $2 a week for coal in the cold months, and the rest for food and boots and thread and lamp oil, and the doctor when the doctor cannot be avoided. It leaves nothing. It is not designed to leave anything. It leaves so precisely nothing that the entire structure of your week is built around finding a 4th and a 5th stream of income to lay beside your husband's wage, which is why the table you are eating at is about to become a workbench. Your oldest is 9, and she is already dressed for the street, which in her case means boots that were her cousin's, a skirt let down twice, and a shawl pinned rather than tied, because the pin holds better when she runs. She eats standing up. You have told her not to, and she does it anyway, and this morning you let it go. The middle one is 5, and eats slowly and dreamily, and will still be at it when everyone else has gone. The youngest is not yet a year, and sleeps in a drawer taken out of the bureau and set on 2 chairs, lined with a folded quilt. And this is not a sign of anything except that a drawer is the right size and costs nothing, and the child is warm in it. Half the infants on this street have slept in one. When she outgrows it, the drawer goes back into the bureau and holds linen again. The bread comes off the loaf in a fixed order that nobody in the room has ever discussed. Your husband first, because he is going out to a bench for 11 hours. The 9-year-old second, because she is going out too. Then the 5-year-old. Then you, and you take the heel, and you take it standing at the stove, and you eat it while you are already doing the next thing. Now, the grocer. This is where the real cost of being poor in this city hides, and it hides in plain sight in a small book with a paper cover kept behind the counter on the corner of Orchard and Broome. You do not pay cash for groceries. Almost nobody on this street pays cash for groceries. You buy on the book, on tick, on credit, and the grocer writes it down. And on Saturday, when your husband is paid, you go in and settle as much of it as you can. And whatever you cannot settle rolls forward into next week's page. In a good stretch, the book comes clean every Saturday. In a bad stretch, it climbs, and the 2 of you both watch it climbing, and neither of you says very much about it. The grocer is not a villain in this story. He is extending unsecured credit to people with no assets, in a trade with margins measured in fractions of a cent. And some of what he lends will never come back to him, and he knows which families it will be. He prices for that. He also sells you tea by the ounce, and sugar by the quarter pound, and coal oil by the pint, because that is what you can afford to buy at one time. And small quantities cost more per unit than large ones. Always, everywhere, in every trade. Put those 2 things together, and you arrive at the plain and permanent injustice of it. The woman who can pay cash and buy in bulk pays the lowest price in the city. The woman who buys on credit in ounces pays the highest. You are paying a premium of 1/5, a quarter, sometimes 1/3, on nearly everything that comes through your door. And the premium exists precisely because you cannot afford to avoid it. Poverty in this city is not only a shortage of money, it is a tax on the shortage. Your husband stands. He has his dinner pail, tin with a wire handle, and in it there is bread, a piece of the same herring, and a raw onion, and he will eat it at his bench at noon with the other men, and the room will smell of it for an hour afterward. He puts on the hat. He says something to the 5-year-old that makes her laugh into her cup. Then the door, and his tread down the 4 flights. Quick, because he can go down empty-handed in a way you never can. And the sound of it fading landing by landing until the street door swings, and the noise of Orchard Street comes up the stairwell for a second, and is cut off again. You put the pot back. You wipe the table. And you go to the shelf where the bundle is waiting. The bundle is wrapped in a square of coarse grey cloth, tied with a length of the same cord that ties every bundle in this building. And it came up the stairs on the shoulder of a boy who works for the contractor on Ludlow Street. It has been sitting on the shelf since yesterday evening, and it weighs about as much as your youngest child. You lift it down and set it on the table you have just wiped, and this is the moment the room changes. 10 minutes ago, it was a kitchen. Now it is a shop. Nothing moved except the bundle. The stove is the same stove, the chairs the same chairs, the smell of coffee still in the air, but the table is now a workbench, and you are now the third link in a chain that begins in a warehouse on Broadway and ends in a store window in Chicago or St. Louis, with a card in it that says the price. Untie the cord. Fold the cloth back. Inside are 30 pairs of trousers, cut and machine-seamed elsewhere, delivered to you in the state the trade calls unfinished. The heavy work is done. What remains is the work a machine of 1884 cannot do, and a man in a shop will not do cheaply. The felling of the seams by hand, the buttonholes, the buttons themselves, the tacking at the pocket corners where the strain will come, the hemming, the pressing. Perhaps 40 separate small operations on each pair, and 30 pairs in the bundle, and the whole of it must go back across the street by tomorrow evening. Or the boy takes the next bundle to a different door on a different landing. Here is something worth understanding before the needle moves, because the arrangement in this room is not an accident, and it is not old-fashioned. It is new. It is, in 1884, the most modern method of making clothing in the world. The old way of making a coat was that a tailor made a coat. He measured, cut, sewed, fitted, and finished, and he was paid for a coat, and he had served an apprenticeship of years to be able to do it. That man still exists on this island. He works uptown, and he has customers with names. But he is not making the trousers on your table, and the trousers on your table are what most of America now wears. What replaced him is a system with a name. The trade calls it the sweating system, and the word does not refer to heat. It refers to squeezing, the way you squeeze a rag. A manufacturer, a firm with a name on a building and a showroom, and travelers who carry samples to the West, buys the cloth in bulk and has it cut by machine in a loft, hundreds of layers at a stroke. He does not want the rest of the trouble. So he hands the cut goods to a contractor. The contractor is the sweater. He's often a man of your own neighborhood, sometimes of your own village in Europe, sometimes a man who was doing exactly what you are doing 3 years ago, and has moved one step up the ladder by acquiring a sewing machine, a room, and a reputation for delivering on time. He takes the cut goods, and he breaks the work into pieces, and he gives the machine work to men and women in a shop that may be nothing more than the front room of his own apartment, and he gives the finishing to women in their own homes. To you. The beauty of it, from above, is that the manufacturer owns no shop, employs no one, pays no rent on the space where the work happens, buys no lamps, buys no coal, and is responsible for nothing. The contractor bids against other contractors for the bundle, and the bidding drives the price down, and the contractor recovers his margin from the only place left to recover it, which is the rate he offers you. You bid against every other woman on every other landing, on every other street, who also needs the bundle. Nobody in the chain has to be cruel for the arithmetic to come out this way. The arithmetic comes out this way on its own. And the cost of the workshop, note this, is yours. The table is yours. The chairs are yours. The coal that keeps your fingers warm enough to hold a needle is yours. The lamp oil after dark is yours. The floor being swept, the space being heated, the 8 cubic feet the bundle occupies on your shelf, all of it yours, and none of it appears anywhere in the price of a pair of trousers. Now, the needle. You sit with your back to the window, so the air shaft light comes over your shoulder onto the work, and your 5-year-old is under the table with a spool, and the 9-year-old is already at the other end of the table with the buttons in a saucer. And this is the part that no one outside these buildings quite pictures correctly. The family is not sitting around while the mother works. The family is the labor force. The 9-year-old sews buttons. She has been sewing buttons since she was 6, and she is better at it than you are, honestly better, faster, 4 stitches, and a knot and a snap of the thread against her teeth. And she does not have to look at what her hands are doing. This is the thing about children raised into a trade at the table. They do not learn it exactly. They absorb it the way they absorbed the languages in this building. Ask her when she learned, and she will not know what you mean. You do the felling and the buttonholes, because the buttonhole is the test. A bad buttonhole comes back, and a bundle that comes back is a bundle unpaid, and worse, it is a mark against you with the contractor, who has 100 doors he can knock on instead of yours. So the buttonholes are yours and yours alone, 12 to 15 stitches to the inch, the thread waxed, the eye of it worked round, and there are, on 30 pairs of trousers, something over 200 of them. The 3-year-old is not working. The 3-year-old is being kept out of the fire and out of the pins, which is itself a full occupation, and it belongs to the 5-year-old who takes it seriously, and who will be sewing buttons herself inside a year. Let us do the sum, because the sum is the whole story, and the trade press of the period lets us do it with some confidence. For finishing a pair of trousers of this grade, you are paid somewhere between 5 and 8 cents. Say 6. 30 pairs in the bundle is $1.80, and out of that comes your own thread, which you buy, and your own needles, which break, and the wax, and the lamp oil for the hours after dark. Call it $1.60 clear if the bundle is clean and nothing comes back. The bundle takes you, with the 9-year-old's hands helping, about 14 hours spread across a day and a half, and those 14 hours are not 14 consecutive hours, because nobody in this room gets 14 consecutive hours of anything. They are stitched into the day, between the water and the fire, and the market, and the meals, and the washing. 5 minutes here, and 40 there, picked up and put down 40 times, which is its own kind of exhausting, the constant restarting. So, something near 11 cents an hour, for 2 people, at a table, in a room you pay rent on. Your husband, at his bench in a shop on Rivington Street, will earn perhaps $11 or $12 in a good week, and considerably less in a slow one. And the cigar trade has slow ones, long ones, because the whole industry is in the middle of a fight about whether cigars may be made in tenement rooms at all. The state passed a law against it in 1883. The law is being contested in the courts this very year, and the courts will strike it down, and every man in the trade knows that when they do, the shops will lose work to the buildings, and the rate will fall. That is the second thing about a household like yours, and it matters more than the first. The income is not one stream. It is 4 or 5 small ones, none of them reliable, all of them arriving at different times, and the whole art of running this family is the art of keeping the total above the rent. There is his wages, when the shop is busy. There is your finishing, when the contractor has a bundle. There is the boarder in the front room, whose $3 a week is the only fixed and certain money in the entire household, and is therefore the money the rent is paid out of. There is what the 9-year-old brings in from an errand or a delivery. There is, in a hard month, the shelling of nuts, or the making of artificial flowers, or the picking over of feathers. Work that pays even less than trousers, and is taken when trousers are not to be had. Not one of those streams is a wage in the sense a clerk would recognize. Not one of them is written in a book with your name at the top of a column. But together, in a decent week, they come to $18 or $19, and rent is $10 a month, and that is the margin the whole apparatus rests on. The work settles into its rhythm, and the room goes quiet. And this is a particular quiet, not the quiet of rest. Conversation in a room where 2 people are sewing goes in bursts. A whole minute of nothing but the small sounds, the needle going through heavy cotton, the button saucer, a foot swinging under a chair. Then the 9-year-old says something about a girl at school, and you answer with 3 words, and the quiet closes over it again. Then nothing for 2 minutes. Then the 3-year-old wants something and gets it. You have learned, over years of this, to hold a conversation in fragments spread over an hour, and to think in fragments too. The mind does its own piecework. What is owed to the grocer? Whether the boots will last to spring, whether the boy will come today or tomorrow with the next bundle. The light in the air shaft moves a hand's width down the opposite brick. Your fingers find the next buttonhole without being told. By mid-morning, the room has given you all it can. There is bread enough for the children's dinner, but nothing to put on it, and the onions are gone, and the coffee tin has that hollow sound when you tip it. So you set the work down mid-seam, which you hate doing, and pin the shawl, and take the basket down off its nail. The stairs go down into darkness, and then into noise. 4 flights, and at each landing the sound of the street gets louder until you push through the door, and it arrives all at once. Hester Street on a weekday morning is one of the densest places in the country. Not one of the densest in the city. In the country. There are blocks on the Lower East Side in these years, carrying something like 500 people to the acre. And on market days, it does not feel like an estimate. It feels like arithmetic you are personally standing inside of. The carts run along both curbs, wheel to wheel, with barely a gap for a wagon to pass. Between the carts and the building fronts, there is a channel of people, perhaps 6 feet wide, and everyone in it is moving, and everyone in it has stopped to look at something. You go into it sideways, basket held in front of you, and the sound closes over your head. Here is something worth slowing down for, because the pushcart is one of the most useful things in this whole neighborhood, and it is easy to look at it and see only clutter. A pushcart is a business that a person can enter with almost nothing. Not nothing, exactly. The cart itself can be rented for 10 or 15 cents a day from a stable that keeps 40 of them, and the stock, if it is fruit or onions or fish, might be had at the wholesale markets before dawn for $2 or $3 on credit, if the wholesaler knows your face. So a man who arrives in this country in March with $8 and no English can be selling herring on Hester Street by April. He does not need a shop. He does not need a lease. He does not need to speak to a landlord or a bank or any institution that would look at him and find him wanting. He needs a cart, a spot, and the willingness to stand in weather for 14 hours. The city requires a license, and the licenses are cheap, and the enforcement is uneven. And a great many carts operate without one, and pay instead in small coins to whoever comes along to notice. That is its own kind of tax, and everyone understands it as such. What the carts sell is nearly everything a household in these buildings might need, and nothing it does not. Potatoes and onions and cabbage, apples in season, and dried fruit out of it, herring in barrels of brine, which is the great cheap protein of this neighborhood, live fish in tubs and dead fish on ice, bread, though bread is mostly from the bakeries, eggs sold by the piece rather than the dozen, because a woman who needs 2 eggs should be able to buy 2 eggs. Suspenders, spectacles laid out on a cloth, and you try each pair until the newspaper comes clear. Second-hand coats, buttons and thread and tape, pots, a cart of nothing but combs. Walk 100 paces of it, and you hear 4 languages, and possibly 6. Yiddish and German, mostly, along this stretch. Italian nearer the corner where the fruit is. Irish inflected English at the end of the block, and the peculiar working pidgin that the market itself has generated, which is not any language, just the 60 or 80 words 2 people need in order to agree on the price of a fish. The fish is the first thing you want. There is a woman at the second cart who knows you or knows your face and your habits, which in this market is the same as knowing you. The white fish are laid out with their heads toward the street. You lift one and turn it and look at the gill and set it down and lift another. This is not theatre. A fish that has been on a cart since 5 in the morning in warm weather is a different proposition than one that came in an hour ago. And you can tell, and she knows you can tell, and the price accounts for it. She says a number. You say a smaller number and start to set the fish down. She says the first number again, but differently. You say your number again and add a word about the gill. She takes off a penny and puts it in a sentence that suggests she is being robbed and doing you a kindness. You pay. The whole exchange takes perhaps 40 seconds, and it is one of maybe 30 such exchanges you will conduct today, and every one of them is a calculation. This is the part that gets left out of the pictures. A woman moving through this market with 60 cents is doing continuous mental accounting at a speed that would exhaust a bookkeeper. What onions cost yesterday and what they cost now. Whether the cheaper cart at the far end is cheap enough to justify the extra 4 minutes and the extra weight carried an extra block. Whether to buy the larger quantity of potatoes at the better rate, given that you have no cool place to keep them, and a third of them may go soft. Whether the cracked eggs at the egg cart, sold at half, will hold together long enough to get up 4 flights. You buy the cracked eggs. You almost always buy the cracked eggs, onions next, and a cabbage that has 1 bad outer leaf and is therefore 3 cents rather than 5, and the bad leaf comes off in the yard, and the cabbage is a cabbage. A 1/4 pound of butter, which is a luxury, and which you buy in that quantity, because that is what you can afford at one time. And yes, buying butter a 1/4 pound at a time costs more per pound than buying it by the tub. And no, there is no version of this month in which you have the money for a tub. This block was not always this block, and that is worth a moment. In 1884, the Lower East Side is in the middle of a change that has not finished. The older population here is German, and has been for 40 years. This was Kleindeutschland, Little Germany, one of the largest German-speaking settlements anywhere outside of Europe, with its own newspapers, its own singing societies, its own beer halls and shooting clubs and savings banks, before the Germans, and alongside them, the Irish, in enormous numbers, filling the wards nearer the waterfront and the older houses that had been cut up into rooms. Now, in these particular years, the composition is shifting fast. Italians are arriving in numbers that will keep climbing for 30 years, settling west and south of here toward Mulberry. And Eastern European Jews from the Russian Empire and from Galicia have begun arriving in a movement that started in earnest around 1881 and will not slow down until the borders close in the 1920s. In 1884, that movement is 3 years old and already visible on every block, in the signs, in the languages, in the trades. The sorting happens by street and sometimes by building. Not by law. Nobody assigns it. It happens because a man, who comes from a particular town, writes to his brother and tells him which building has a room. And the brother comes and takes the room. And in 4 years, there are 11 families in that building, from within 30 miles of the same place. It happens because the butcher, who can sell you what you are permitted to eat, is on this corner, and not that one. It happens because you can conduct your whole day in your own language within these 6 blocks, and cannot within the next 6. So the neighborhood is not one thing. It is 100 villages laid over each other, and the market is the place where they touch. A German woman, who has been in this country since 1852, buys her potatoes from a man who has been here since last autumn, and they transact perfectly well in about 40 shared words, and neither of them thinks anything of it, and both of them have opinions about the other that they keep behind their teeth. The basket is heavy now, and pulling your shoulder down on one side. You shift it to the other arm and start back, and the crowd moves against you, and a boy with a tray of pretzels goes past your hip at a dead run. There is a man at the corner selling nothing but ice, chipping it off a block with a pick, and you do not buy any, because ice is for people with a place to put it. There is a woman with a cart of second-hand boots, and you look because the 9-year-old's boots have perhaps 2 months in them, and the price for a pair that would fit is more than you have in your pocket today. And you note the cart and the woman, and you will come back on a Friday when the piecework money comes in. Then the doorway, and the sudden drop in noise, and the smell of the hallway after the smell of the street. 4 flights with a full basket is a different climb than 4 flights with a bucket, because the bucket wants to spill, and the basket only wants to break your arm. You go up the first 2 flights at a decent pace, and stop on the second landing, not because you must, but because you have learned that stopping there means you arrive at the top, able to speak. A woman comes down past you with a child on her hip, and says something about the fish being good today, and you agree that it is passable. The door, the room, the children look up. The light in the air shaft has moved another hand's width, and it is not yet noon. You set the basket on the table. on top of the finished trousers. And then move the trousers, because that is the kind of mistake that costs you a piece. Monday would be the proper day for it. And this is not Monday, but the proper day belongs to women whose weeks are shaped by custom, rather than by the arrival of work. The trousers came in on a Saturday this time, so the washing waits until the middle of the week. And by the middle of the week, the pile in the corner has grown into something you have to move in 2 trips. The first thing washing day takes is water, and the second thing it takes is fire, and both of them have to be carried up 4 flights by you. You start the stove hotter than you would for cooking. That means more coal, and coal is money, and you have already done the arithmetic and decided that the shirts cannot wait another week. The boiler goes on top, the big oval copper one that came from your mother-in-law's kitchen, and has a patched seam on one side that you have learned to keep away from the hottest part of the plate. It holds enough water to be worth heating, and not so much that you cannot lift it when it is full, which was probably the whole design. Down for water. Up with water. Down again. The pump in the yard runs slow in the morning because everyone is at it, and by 10:30 it runs better. And so you have arranged your day around the habits of a pump. While the first boiler heats you sort, whites in one heap, and there is no such thing as whites in this room, only cloth that used to be white and is now the color of weak tea. Colored things in another heap. The husband's work shirts in a third, because tobacco gets into cloth and stays there, and you do not want it in the children's things. The sheets, which get washed less often than anyone would admit in a magazine, go in with the whites when you can face them. Then the rubbing. The board goes into the tub at an angle, propped against your knee, corrugated zinc in a wooden frame, and you take the shirt, and you soap it, and you push it up the board, and drag it down again, up and down, working the collar and the cuffs and the armholes hardest, because that is where a body leaves itself. Your knuckles ride the ridges. After the first half hour, your hands are past feeling it, which is not the same as it not happening. Here is the part of this that people underestimate, and it is not the soap or the heat. It is the weight. A dry cotton sheet is nothing. A wet cotton sheet is a body. Wool is worse. Everything you handle on this day, you handle in its heaviest possible state, and you handle it wet and hot, lifting it from the boiler with a stick, wringing it by hand with a twist that runs from your wrists to your shoulders, carrying it dripping from tub to tub. The rinse water has to be changed, which means more trips, which means more stairs, which means more water carried up. A woman in this building will move something in the range of 200 pounds of water in a washing day, most of it upward, and none of it will appear in any account of what she did that week. Soap costs money, and there are 2 kinds. There is the yellow laundry bar, cheap, harsh, cut into a chunk on the grocer's counter, and there is the finer kind you do not buy. A bar lasts a while if you are careful, and being careful means shaving it into the hot water rather than rubbing it directly onto the cloth, because rubbing wastes it. You are careful. Some women make their own from grease and lye, and some do not, and it depends mostly on whether you have grease to spare. And this household does not, because grease goes on bread. Now, the obvious question, There are commercial laundries in this city in 1884. There are Chinese hand laundries on nearly every commercial block downtown, and steam laundries uptown doing hotel work by the ton. The answer to why you do not use them is not pride and not ignorance. A Chinese laundry might charge somewhere around 8 or 10 cents to do a man's shirt, collar, and cuffs included, and do it beautifully, better than you can do it, with a starch and a finish you cannot match on a coal stove. Your husband owns 3 shirts. Doing the family wash-out would run at those rates, $1 or more a week, and the household's entire cash income is somewhere between $9 and $12 in a good week. $1 is the coal. $1 is very nearly the rent for a week. So instead of $1, you spend a day, because your day is the one thing in this household that is priced at nothing. That is the whole economics of housework in this period in a single line. When labor is free, it gets used instead of money. The women who paid to have their washing done were not women who valued cleanliness more. They were women whose time had a price attached to it, or whose husband's status required that it appeared to. Every survey done in these years, every budget study, every reformer's questionnaire that asked women which task they hated most, came back with the same answer, and it was not cooking. And it was not scrubbing floors, and it was not the children. It was the wash. It took the most hours. It caused the most physical damage. It had to be done in the same room where the family lived and ate, and it filled that room with steam for an entire day, in a building already damp enough to grow mold on the plaster. By 2 in the afternoon, the room is a fog. The window that faces the air shaft is open and does almost nothing. Your hair is stuck to your neck. The youngest has been put on the bed with a wooden spoon and a tin to keep away from the boiler, and has fallen asleep there, which is the single piece of luck in the day. Then it comes out of the tub and has to go somewhere. The lines run across the air shaft on pulleys, one set for each floor, and yours is the second pulley from the left, which you inherited when the family who had it moved to Rivington Street. You lean out with a full basket at your feet, and pin and let out, pin and let out, and the line sags and rises as the weight goes onto it, and 40 feet below, there is a strip of yard you cannot see clearly from here. There is an etiquette here, and it is enforced without anyone writing it down. You do not put out on a day when the woman below you has already put out, if you can help it, because water runs downward, and a dripping sheet on a dry sheet is a quarrel. You take your things in when they are dry, and not an hour later, because line space is the only common property in this building, and hoarding it is remembered. You do not hang anything over the yard on a Friday afternoon when the family on the ground floor is bringing in for the Sabbath. Nobody taught you these rules. You learned them by breaking one of them in your first month here and hearing about it for a year. And there is a woman on the 4th floor of the front building whose window faces yours across the shaft, and you have never spoken to her. And you know her family's laundry the way you know your own. You know she has 2 boys and lost the use of one of her sheets sometime last winter. She knows the same about you. That is a form of intimacy the reformers who came through with clipboards never had a category for. Nothing dries well in an air shaft. There is no sun in there, and very little moving air. And what air there is carries the smell of the privies in the yard, and everybody's cooking. Things come in half damp and finish on a line strung across the room, over the table, over the stove, and for 2 nights the family sleeps in a room hung with its own wet clothes. Which brings up the thing that sits underneath this entire day, and it is worth saying plainly. Cleanliness in a tenement was not a matter of character. It was a matter of plumbing. The city in these years is in the middle of a long argument about exactly this. There are men writing very confident things about the habits of the poor, about slovenliness and indifference, about how some people simply do not care to be clean. And there are other men, sanitary inspectors mostly, walking these buildings with notebooks and arriving at a different conclusion, which is that a woman who must carry every drop of water she uses up 4 flights will use less water than a woman who turns a tap. That is not a moral fact. It is a stair fact. A full bath, for you, means heating water for an hour and filling a tub in a room where 3 other people are living, and then getting rid of the water afterward, which means carrying it back down. So it happens rarely, and washing happens daily instead, in pieces, at the basin, face and hands and neck, and the children get scrubbed properly on a Friday, whether they want it or not. The public bathhouse movement is only beginning to get its footing now. There are floating baths moored in the rivers in summer. Free, wooden enclosures where the city lets people swim in the harbour water, and they are used by tens of thousands of people a season, mostly boys and men, and they close when the weather turns. The real municipal bathhouses, with hot water and year-round doors, are still more than a decade away from this room. When they come, they will be built because of arguments made now, by inspectors counting how many families share one hydrant, and by doctors mapping where the fevers cluster, and noticing that the map matches the map of water access almost exactly. Nobody in this building needs a map to tell them that. They need a tap on the landing, and they will not get one for years. The last thing out of the tub is the youngest's things, done in the cooled water because there is no sense heating more. Then the water goes down the stairs in the bucket, 2 trips, poured into the yard drain, and the boiler goes back on its nail, and the washboard goes behind the door. Your hands have gone red across the knuckles, and there is a split starting at the base of one thumb that you will feel every time you handle the cigar leaf tomorrow. You rub a little of the drippings into them, which is what your mother did. The light in the air shaft has gone from white to a kind of grey gold, coming down at a slant off a window 3 stories above, and it lands on the wet sheets and makes them look, for a few minutes, better than they are. The middle one comes up the stairs at midday, and you hear him before you see him, because at 7 years old, he takes the flights 2 at a time, and the boards on the 3rd landing announce anyone who does that. He is home, because the school lets the younger grades out for the dinner hour, and expects them back by 1, and because the walk is 4 blocks, and because there is bread here, and there is not bread there. He drops his slate on the table, which is still damp in patches from the wash water, and he tells you something about a boy who was made to stand at the front for not knowing his states. You give him bread with drippings and a cup of the morning's coffee cut with water, and you listen with about 1/3 of your attention, because the youngest has found the coal scuttle again, and is sitting beside it with black hands and a look of complete satisfaction. This is the part of the day that has no name in any account of the era. There is no line for it in the census, no wage attached to it, no word in the language of the reformers who will come up these stairs with their notebooks. It is simply the management of small bodies in 2 rooms, hour after hour, while your hands are supposed to be doing something else. The 2 rooms measure together something in the neighborhood of 250 square feet. Into that goes a stove, a table, 2 beds, a trunk, the wash boiler, the work, and 5 people, 6 when the boarder is in from the front room. The youngest is 2, which is the age of maximum danger and minimum sense, and the stove is hot from noon until night. So a portion of your mind is permanently assigned to the position of that child relative to the position of that stove, and it never stands down, not while you are rolling leaf, not while you are counting out coins, not while you are asleep. Here is something worth slowing down for, because it explains a great deal about how families in this building arranged themselves. New York State passed a compulsory education law in 1874. On paper, it required children between 8 and 14 to attend school for 14 weeks a year, and 8 of those weeks consecutive. That is the whole of it. 14 weeks. Not 36, not a school year in any sense you would recognize, and even that modest requirement carried an exemption for children whose labor was necessary to the support of the family, which was, in a neighborhood like this one, very nearly everybody who cared to claim it. Enforcement was left to local school authorities who had no serious machinery for it. There were truant officers, a handful of them, responsible for districts holding tens of thousands of children. A family that kept a child home was, statistically speaking, unlikely to hear about it. The law existed as a statement of intention, and the intention was real, and the gap between the intention and the sidewalk was enormous. The classroom the 7-year-old goes back to at 1 o'clock holds somewhere between 60 and 80 children. That is not an exaggeration, and it was not considered scandalous. Grammar school classes in the crowded downtown wards routinely ran past 60. The desks are bolted to the floor in rows. Instruction is recitation in unison from a reader, and the measure of a good class is that it recites together and sits still. A single teacher, usually a young woman, earning something under $600 a year, holds the room by force of voice and routine. The school buildings themselves are overfull. In the mid-1880s, the downtown wards had thousands more children of school age than they had seats, and it was not unusual for a child to be turned away in the autumn and told to come back next term. Some schools ran on half-day sessions to fit 2 batches of children through the same room. So the picture is not one of children resisting school and parents obstructing it. Some of the time, it is one of children arriving at a door and being told there is no room, and going back down the steps and finding something else to do with the day. And there is a great deal else to do with the day, because a child in this neighborhood is not an expense to be carried. A child is a small, mobile, cheap source of household income, and everybody, including the child, understands this. The oldest boy, the 9-year-old, has been out since morning with a bundle of papers under his arm. He buys them from a distributor at a set price, something like 50 cents for 100 of the penny sheets, and he sells them at a penny each, and whatever he does not sell, he eats. That last part is the whole economics of the thing. The publishers do not take back unsold copies. So a boy who buys 100 papers has already spent his money and must now convert every one of them into a coin or lose it. On a good afternoon, with a fire or a scandal or a ship gone down, he clears 30 or 40 cents. On a wet Tuesday, with nothing in the world happening, he clears 12 and comes home with 8 papers he cannot use and a temper. There are boys blacking boots on the corners with a box and a brush. At a nickel a shine, there are boys carrying parcels from the shops, and boys sweeping the crossings for the pennies of people who do not want mud on their hems, and boys who go down to the docks on the chance of piecework. There are girls doing something less visible and more constant, which is minding the babies. A girl of 8 or 9 in this building is very often the reason her mother can hold a job at all. She carries a child on her hip through most of her waking hours. That labor produces no coin at all and appears in no record, and without it the whole arrangement collapses. And in the room itself, at the table, there is the work you saw this morning. When investigators come through these blocks and count children at labor, this is what unsettles them most. Not the newsboys on Park Row, who are picturesque and get written about affectionately, but the 4-year-old stripping stems from tobacco leaf beside her mother at 8 in the evening. The newsboy is a character in the popular imagination. The child at the table is not a character at all. She is simply part of the household's output, and the household's output is what stands between the household and the street. You do the arithmetic of it without ever laying it out. A child of 9, bringing in $2 in a good week, is bringing in something close to a fifth of what his father earns rolling cigars in a shop. That is not pocket money. That is rent for 6 days. A family of 5 in this ward assembles its income the way you assemble a supper, out of whatever pieces are to hand. And no single piece is large enough to matter alone, and every piece matters. By the middle of the afternoon, you send the 2 older ones out with a sack. This is not a punishment, and it is not an errand invented to occupy them. Coal falls. It falls off the wagons on the way from the yards. It falls along the railroad cut. It falls in a fine scatter around every place where a ton of it is being moved by men working fast. There are boys who wait at the corners where the wagons turn, because a turning wagon spills. There is wood along the edges of every construction site in the ward, and this is a city that is tearing itself down and putting itself up again continuously. And a broken length of scaffold plank is worth carrying 4 blocks. There are barrel staves. There are boxes behind the groceries. A sack of scavenged coal is worth, in the only currency that counts here, a scuttle you do not have to buy. And the scuttle you do not have to buy is somewhere between 10 and 15 cents, which is bread. So the children go out, and you do not know exactly where they are, and you will not know for 2 or 3 hours. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the thing that separates this room from the room of a woman uptown more sharply than the furniture does. Your children are on the street, in traffic that consists of iron-tired wagons and horse cars and horses that spook, in a ward where the sidewalks are a market, and the roadway is a business, and there is no such thing as a place designed for a child to be. You have told them the rules. Stay off the tracks. Stay out of the yards where the men are working. Come back before dark. And then you let them go, and you go back to the Leaf, because the alternative is to keep them in a room of 250 square feet, where they have nothing to do, and because the sack they bring back is real, and because every other mother on this landing is doing the same thing. It is not that you are unafraid. It is that fear here is a constant condition rather than an event, and a condition cannot be acted on the way an event can. You cannot spend the afternoon afraid. You can only keep half an ear turned toward the stairwell. They come back a little after 4. The 9-year-old has the sack over his shoulder in the manner of a much larger man, which is entirely for your benefit, and there is coal in it, and there is also, wrapped in a piece of newspaper, a bruised pear that he will not explain the origin of, and that you decide not to ask about. His knees are black. The 7-year-old has a length of lath and a story about a dog. You take the sack, and you feel its weight, and you say the thing you always say, which is that it is a good haul, because it is, and because he is 9, and it cost him 3 hours. Then the youngest wakes from the nap that ended the only quiet stretch of the day, and the light through the air shaft has gone thin and yellow, and it is time to think about supper. Before you can get the pot on, there is a knock at the door that is not really a knock, because the door is already opening as the knuckles land. That is how doors work on this landing. A closed door is a suggestion. A locked door in the middle of the afternoon would be an announcement that something is wrong. It is the woman from the front apartment, the one whose kitchen window actually faces the street, which everyone on this floor regards as a form of wealth. She has a cup in her hand, and she is already apologizing in a way that is not apology so much as procedure. She needs flour. Not much. Enough to thicken something. She will have it back to you Thursday, when her sister comes. You take the cup, and you fill it from the sack, and you level it off with the side of your hand. And while you are doing that, she tells you that the man on the second floor rear has been let go, and that his wife did not come down for water this morning, and that the shade has been down over their window since yesterday. You hand back the cup. You say you will look in. That exchange, which took 90 seconds, is the most important financial transaction of your day. And no ledger in the city recorded it. Here is what is easy to misunderstand about a building like this. From the outside, from the point of view of a reformer with a notebook, what you see is disorder. Doors standing open. Children in the hall. Women shouting between floors in 3 languages. Borrowing, always borrowing, a cup of this and a quarter pound of that, which to an outside eye looks like a population that cannot manage its own household stores. What is actually happening is an economy. A dense, unwritten, extremely accurate economy. And every woman in this building keeps its books in her head. You know, without having written anything down, that you owe the woman across the hall a half-pound of sugar from 2 weeks ago, and that she has not asked for it because you sat with her mother-in-law for 2 evenings when the old woman had the fever, and that the sitting is worth more than the sugar, and that both of you know this, and that neither of you will ever say it. You know that the family above you owes the whole landing something unspecified for the night their stove smoked, and everyone's washing had to be done twice. You know who returns things and who does not, and the ones who do not are not cut off, because cutting someone off is expensive, and because next winter it might be you. But they get the flour and not the coal, and they get it after you have counted what is left. This is not sentimentality. Sentimentality is what people uptown call it, when they want to admire the poor without paying them. What this is insurance, and it exists because the actual insurance is not available to you. Consider what a family like yours cannot buy. You cannot buy a policy against your husband's hands failing. You cannot buy a policy against 6 weeks of slack season at the cigar shops, which arrives every year and which everyone knows is coming, and which nobody can save enough to cross. You cannot borrow from a bank, because a bank in 1884 has no product for a household with no property and an income of $11 in a good week. A bank is a building you walk past, so the neighborhood built its own, in layers. The first layer is the cup of flour. The second layer is the pawn shop, which is a genuine financial institution and which everybody uses and nobody discusses. There are hundreds of them in this city, and the busiest days are Monday, because the good coat goes in on Monday and comes out on Saturday when the wages are paid. And it does this every week of the year, and the interest on that circuit is a real cost of being poor that no wage table ever counts. Your husband's better waistcoat has made that journey. It is a tool, not a shame, though it is also a little bit a shame, which is why the trip is made early in the morning. The third layer is the society, and this is the one that would surprise the reformers most if they looked at it properly. Almost every group that came into these streets brought with it, or invented within a year of arriving, a mutual benefit society. The Germans have theirs, organized around a trade, or a singing club, or a church. The Irish have theirs, often attached to a parish. The Italians organize by the town or the province they left. The Eastern European Jews arriving in these years form what they call Landsmannschaften, associations of people from the same hometown. And if you ask a man in this neighborhood where he is from, he will not say the country, he will say the town, because the town is the thing that determines who will bury him. That is not a figure of speech. Burial is the core product. A society takes dues, and the dues are small, a matter of cents a month, and in exchange, the society guarantees 3 things: a plot of ground, a sum paid to the widow, and a payment during illness when a man cannot work. Some added a doctor on retainer, paid by the society, who would climb these stairs for members. Some ran a loan fund that would advance a few dollars without interest to a member in a bad month. Some paid the passage for a brother, still on the other side. Membership was not charity, and everybody involved was very clear about that distinction. You paid in. You had a card. You had a vote at the meeting. When the society paid out, it paid out because you had bought the right to be paid out, and the man delivering the envelope to your door was a man you would see the following week at the meeting hall, and who would need something from you eventually. That difference between having bought a thing and having been given a thing is the whole moral architecture of this neighborhood, and it explains a great deal about what happens next. You go down to the 2nd floor rear with a bowl of what you have. The door is answered slowly. The woman is about your age. Her husband was on a bench in a shop off Ludlow Street until Friday, when the contractor cut the bench from 12 men to 8, and there was no reason given, because none is owed. He has been out since 7 this morning, walking to shops and coming back and walking again. She has 2 children and 1 on the way, and a rent of $9.50 due in 11 days. You do not say any of the useful things, because there are none. You put the bowl on the table. You ask whether the society has been notified, and she says her husband will not go, not for this, because the illness fund is for illness, and there is nothing wrong with him. And a man who cannot find work is not sick, he is simply a man who cannot find work. And there is a difference that matters enormously to him, and that you understand completely. So the building will do what the building does. Somebody's brother knows a foreman on Attorney Street. Somebody's sister takes in finishing and has more than she can do this week, and will subcontract a share of it at the same rate she is paid, which is a real sacrifice, and which will not be described as one. The rent will be got up by the 14th out of 8 households in amounts of 40 cents and $1, and once, from the man on the top floor who has no family and drinks less than people assume, $3 flat. And nobody will call it charity, because if you call it charity, the man on the 2nd floor rear cannot accept it. Now, there is an organization in this city, founded in 1882, called the Charity Organization Society, and it would like very much to help you, and you would rather it did not. Its founders were serious, educated, well-intentioned people who had looked at the state of relief in New York and concluded, not entirely wrongly, that it was chaotic. Dozens of separate societies gave out coal and bread and dollars with no coordination, no records, and no way to tell whether a family was receiving from 6 of them at once. The remedy proposed was rationalization, a central register of every relieved household in the city, an investigation of each case before any aid was given, and a corps of volunteers, mostly women of comfortable families, called friendly visitors, who would come into homes like this one, sit down, and get to know the family personally. The theory was that the poor needed not alms but guidance. Money given without inquiry was thought to weaken character. What the deserving household required was contact with a better example, and advice on thrift, and a plan. Understand how this arrives at your door. A woman in a good coat who does not have to ask anyone's permission to spend an afternoon in a stranger's rooms comes up your 4 flights. She sits at the table where the leaves are spread. She asks how much your husband earns and whether he drinks. She asks how much the rent is and what you paid for the coal, and whether you have considered whether the border is a wise arrangement. She asks about your church or your synagogue and how often you go. She writes some of it down. She is not unkind. She may be genuinely warm. She will come back in 2 weeks. And you will answer all of it pleasantly, and give her tea if there is any, because she is a channel to something you may need in February, and because being marked as unworthy is a thing that follows a name through that central register for years. But you will resent the examination for the whole of your life, and so will every woman on this landing. And the resentment is not ingratitude. It is a precise objection. She is investigating whether you are the sort of person to whom things should be given. Nobody is investigating whether the shop off Ludlow Street should be able to cut 12 benches to 8 on a Friday with no notice. The inquiry runs downward only. It examines the household budget of a woman making $3 a week at finishing work, and does not examine the rate. You keep both facts at once, the way you keep everything at once. The visitor's coal ticket in January is real, and you will take it. And the thing she believes about why you need it is wrong. The door closes on the second floor rear. You go back up, past the landing where the flower cup started, counting, without meaning to, what is owed and to whom, and how long you can carry it. There is an errand today that cannot be done downtown. It is a small thing, and it is the sort of small thing that decides a week. A shirtwaist shop on 23rd Street has work to give out, and a woman on the third floor front has a cousin who says the rate is better than what the Ludlow Street contractor pays, and better by enough that it is worth going to ask in person, rather than waiting for word to travel back down through 3 people and arrive wrong. So you put on the shawl, and you take the basket with nothing in it, because a woman carrying an empty basket looks like she has business, and a woman carrying nothing looks like she is lost. The first decision is the fare. 5 cents to ride the elevated. That is the number, flat, no matter how far you go, and it is the same 5 cents that buys a loaf of bread, or a quarter pound of coffee at the grocer's price, or 2/3 of what your 9-year-old earns in an afternoon of good scavenging. 5 cents each way is 10 cents, and 10 cents is a piece of the day's food, and you can walk it instead. 2.5 miles up, 2.5 back, an hour each way at the pace a woman keeps when she has to be back before the children are. And the hour is not free either, because the hour is piecework not done. So the arithmetic is not fair against nothing. It is fair against an hour of finishing work, and the hour of finishing work is worth about 4 cents, and so the ride costs you 1 cent net, and buys you back the ability to arrive at a shop on 23rd Street, not sweating and not grey in the face. You ride. You take the 3rd Avenue line, and you feel slightly reckless about it. And you would not tell your husband the reason you rode, rather than walked, was so as to look like a woman worth giving work to. Here is something worth slowing down for, because that nickel is doing more in this city than it appears to be. The elevated railways were young in 1884. The 9th Avenue line had been running in some form since the late 1600s of the century's 70s, and the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th Avenue lines had come up fast behind it, so that by the middle of the 1880s, Manhattan had 4 steel spines running the length of the island, carrying something on the order of 100 million passengers a year. Steam locomotives, small ones, hauling wooden cars 2 and 3 stories above the street on iron trestles that ran directly past the 2nd floor windows of the buildings they served. The fare had been the whole political fight. It began at 10 cents, with a 5 cent rate during the commission hours, the early morning and the early evening, when working people traveled. The idea, argued in the newspapers and in the legislature, was that a cheap ride would empty the crowded wards, that a man could live in the upper reaches of the island where there was air and ride down to his work for a nickel, and that this would solve the tenement question without anyone having to build anything or regulate anything. By 1884, the 5 cent rate had spread across most of the day, on most of the lines. It did not empty the wards. It rearranged who could live where, but it rearranged it upward, not downward. The clerk making $15 a week could take rooms at 86th Street and ride. The man making $9 could not, because his 10 cents a day was a 14th of his wage, and because his wife took in work that had to be fetched and returned from a shop within walking distance, and because his children's earnings depended on knowing the specific blocks where a boy could sell papers or scavenge coal. A family in your position is not held downtown by ignorance of the uptown air. It is held by the fact that the whole apparatus of getting through a week, the credit at the grocer's, the neighbor who takes the baby, the contractor 2 streets away, the burial society, is a local machine, and it does not travel for 5 cents. The other thing about the elevated is what it did to the street beneath it. You have walked under the 3rd Avenue tracks 1,000 times. The light down there is permanently wrong. A kind of grey afternoon at all hours, striped where the sun comes through the ties. Cinders come down. Ash and hot water drip from the locomotives, and the shopkeepers under the line hang awnings that are black within a month, and the noise when a train passes is loud enough that a conversation simply stops, and both people wait. Property values on the avenues fell where the tracks went up, and rents fell with them, which is one more reason the poorest blocks stayed poorest. The city sold air rights above the street and paid for it below. Riding, though, is a different thing entirely from walking underneath, and this is the part you will not admit to anyone. You are at the window. The car sways, and for 18 minutes you are looking directly into the 2nd and 3rd floor rooms of 1.5 miles of New York, and nobody in them can do anything about it. A woman ironing, a man asleep in a chair with his boots on at 10:30 in the morning, which means night work. A room with a plant in the window and a bird cage. A schoolroom. A room with nothing in it at all. It is the only place in the city where a person like you looks down at other people's lives instead of up. Then the character of the windows changes, and you get off, and you walk west, and the city stops being the one you know. The shirtwaist shop takes 10 minutes and gives you a rate to think about and a name to bring back. And it is neither triumph nor disaster, and you will do the sums tonight. It is what happens afterward that you did not plan. You have gone slightly wrong on the way back toward the station and come out on 5th Avenue somewhere in the 30s, and you stop because there is no reason not to, and because you have 3/4 of an hour that nobody is counting. The brownstones stand in an unbroken line. That is the first thing. Not one building distinguishable from the next, except by the brass and the curtains. 20 feet wide, 4 stories, the high stoop climbing to a front door that is plainly not for everybody, and a second door at ground level under the stoop, behind the iron railing, in the areaway. Deliveries at the low door. Servants at the low door. The whole social architecture of the block is stated in the fact that there are 2 doors, and everyone knows which is theirs. The windows are enormous, and the glass is clean. That is the second thing, and it is the one you find you cannot stop looking at. Somebody washes that glass. On the 3rd house along, a girl of perhaps 19 is doing the areaway steps with a brush and a pail, on her knees, cap on, sleeves pinned back, and she does not look up as you pass, and you do not slow down enough for her to have to. Consider what stands between the 2 of you. because it is not what a person on this avenue would guess. That girl is a general servant, or one of 2 or 3 in a house of that size. If she came over from Ireland at 17, which is likely, she is earning somewhere in the neighborhood of $12 to $16 a month, with her room, her board, and often her tea and her laundry included. Call it $14. A cook in a serious household might get 20 or 25. A lady's maid, similar. A laundress by the day, about $1.25. And because her food and her bed cost her nothing, nearly all of that $14 is hers. She can put $4 or $5 a month into the savings bank and send 3 home. And girls did exactly that in enormous numbers, year after year, and paid the passage for the sister behind them. Now set it against you. Your husband brings home, in a good week at the bench, something like $12, and in a bad one, $7. Your finishing work adds $2.50 to $3.50. The boarder adds $3 a month. Out of the total comes rent of $10 to $12 a month, coal, food for 5, and every other thing. The girl on those steps has more disposable money in her hand at the end of a month than your household does. And she is 19, and she is scrubbing. So why does every woman on your landing swear she would never go into service? Because of the hours, first. She rises at 5:30 and is not finished at 10 6.5 days a week, and her half-day off is Sunday afternoon. And there is no such thing as being off-duty in a house where you also sleep. Because of the bell, second, which is the thing they all mention, the bell that can ring at any hour and must be answered running. Because a servant is watched constantly, and her letters are noticed, and her followers are disapproved of, and she can be dismissed on a word without a character reference, which ends her employment in that trade in that city. And because in an American household, service carried a stain that factory work did not. A girl in a shop finished at 6 and walked out into her own evening and her own street and her own people, and she was poorer for it, and she chose it in her thousands. And the mistresses of these houses wrote long complaining letters to the newspapers about the servant problem, and never once connected it to the bell. You know all this in outline, the way everyone knows it, because half the women you grew up near have a cousin who tried it. What you cannot quite fit into your head, standing on that pavement, is the quiet. There is no market noise, no carts, no children. 20 families, or perhaps 12, occupy the frontage that on Orchard Street holds 400 people. The air is the same air, 1.5 miles north, and it is not the same air at all. A carriage comes down. You've been standing long enough. You turn east toward the station, and the ride back is the ordinary miracle of it, because it takes 18 minutes to go from that pavement to your own. And somewhere around 14th Street the light changes, and the sound comes up, and the smell comes back, coal and fish and horses and wet stone, and you get down the stairs into it, and something in your chest unclenches, which surprises you every time, and is not affection exactly, and is not resignation either. It is simply that this is the part of the city that knows your name, and the other part has no use for it. Your own pavement takes you back in stages. The basket first, still on your arm, lighter now than the errand that carried you north. Then the stairs, 4 flights of them, the second landing where the boards give under your left foot, the way they have given for 2 years. Then the door and the smell of your own 2 rooms, which is coal and damp plaster and whatever was last cooked, and which you cannot smell at all unless you have been away from it for an hour. The middle child is at the table with the finishing work. The youngest is asleep in the drawer. The oldest is not back yet from wherever the afternoon took her. And you decide not to think about that for another 20 minutes. Your husband comes home at 7. You hear him before the door, because the whole building is a set of instructions in sound, and his particular tread on the 3rd flight is one you learned in the 1st month of the marriage. He comes in with tobacco on him. Not smoke, exactly. The raw leaf smell, sweet and slightly rotten, that gets into the wool of a cigar maker's coat, and never quite comes out of it, so that on Sunday, in the good coat, he still carries a ghost of it. His hands are stained brown at the fingertips. That will not come out either. It is the mark of the trade, as much as a baker's forearms or a stonecutter's cough, and you can pick a cigar maker out of a crowd on the Bowery at 40 feet. He puts down the dinner pail. It comes back nearly empty, which is a good sign, and you take it to the basin without saying anything about it. Supper is cooked on 1 burner, because there is 1 burner, and everything that happens tonight has to be organized around that constraint. Potatoes have been going since 5:30. There is bread from Monday, and the soup you began in the morning, with an onion and a scrap of salt pork, and a bone the butcher on Ludlow Street let go for 2 cents, because he had 4 of them, and one was going grey. There is coffee, because there is always coffee, and it has been on the back of the stove being reheated since the 2nd hour of the day, and tastes like it. Here is what a working family in this city actually ate across a week, because the picture in most people's heads is either a fantasy of immigrant abundance or a fantasy of immigrant starvation. And the truth is a narrow, monotonous, calculated thing in between. Bread is the foundation, not a side dish. The foundation. A family your size goes through perhaps 20 loaves in a week, and at 5 or 6 cents, the loaf that is a full $1 or more out of a household income, that might be 12. Potatoes come next, cheap and filling and endlessly repeatable, boiled, fried in drippings, mashed with whatever fat is available. Then the things that make bread and potatoes bearable: onions, cabbage, herring, pickles, cheap coffee, cheap tea, a little butter, if the week has been kind, and drippings if it has not. Meat is an event, not a daily fact. A family like yours might see fresh meat once a week, on Sunday, in a quantity that a comfortable household would consider a garnish. The rest of the week's protein comes in the form of a bone with something clinging to it, or a piece of salt pork boiled with beans, or a fish so cheap the pushcart man is glad to see the back of it. When the investigators came through these blocks in the 80s and wrote down what they found in the pots, what struck them was not the poverty of it, which they expected, but the sameness of it. The same soup, the same bread, the same coffee, 4 times a day, hot and thin, and doing more work as a comfort than as a food. And this is the part the reformers consistently got wrong. They looked at a diet like yours and concluded that immigrant women did not know how to cook nutritiously, and they wrote pamphlets and gave demonstrations in settlement kitchens on the preparation of wholesome, inexpensive dishes. What they were slow to understand is that the diet was not the product of ignorance. It was the product of one burner, no ice, no storage, no capital to buy in quantity, and a wage that arrived in fragments. You cannot make a stew that requires 3 hours of steady flame when coal costs what coal costs. You cannot buy a sack of anything when you buy in pennies. The menu is not a choice. It is the shape of the constraints, cooked. You are setting out 5 plates, and one of them is not for family. The boarder comes in at 20 minutes past 7, which is later than usual, and he apologizes for it in the old language, and you tell him it does not matter, in the same language, and he sits down at the end of the table nearest the front room where he sleeps. He is 22. He came out of the same district your husband came out of, a place small enough that when he says the name of the road his mother lives on, you can see the road. He has been in the city 11 months. He works at a press in a shirt factory on Broome Street, and he sends money home on the 1st of every month with an accuracy that would shame a bank. He pays you $3 a week for the front room floor, his supper, and his laundry. That figure deserves a moment, because it is doing more for this household than almost anything else in it. $3 a week is more than $12 a month, and the rent on these 2 rooms is around 10. The boarder pays the rent. Not part of it, all of it, and something over. Which means that everything your husband earns at the cigar bench, and everything you and the children earn at the table, goes to food, coal, clothing, boots, the grocer's book, and the small, terrifying category of everything else. Take him away, and this apartment does not work. That is not a sentimental statement. It is an arithmetic one. And you are not unusual. The census takers who went through these wards in the 1880s came back with numbers that genuinely shocked the men who read them. On some blocks, half the households contained at least one person unrelated to the family. In some buildings, the proportion ran higher. There were apartments of 2 rooms holding a married couple, 4 children, and 3 lodgers. And there were arrangements the investigators found harder to describe still, where the same bed was used by a night worker and a day worker in rotation, so that the mattress never cooled. Reformers wrote about this with a horror that was partly genuine and partly a failure of imagination. They saw crowding and inferred disorder. They used the word promiscuous, by which they meant mixed, undifferentiated, without proper separation. And they built an entire moral architecture on top of a housing problem. What they were slower to see is that lodging was a system, and that women ran it, because it is women who run it. The husband earns the wage at the bench. The wife earns the difference. She decides how many lodgers a room can hold, at what price, on what terms, with meals or without. And she does the cooking and the washing that the price includes. And she is the one who has the conversation when a man is 2 weeks behind. In the household accounts of this ward, taking in boarders is the single largest source of income generated by a woman's labor, and it appears in no wage survey of the period, because nobody was paying her a wage. When the government counted the working population of this city in 1880, women like you were counted as keeping house. That was the category. Keeping house. You are running a small residential business out of 1 room, feeding 6 people on 1 burner, and doing finishing work at the table between courses. and the official record of the United States describes you as at home. Supper takes 20 minutes. It always takes 20 minutes. Nobody lingers, because there is nowhere to linger to, and the table is needed. The talk is in 2 languages and slides between them without anyone noticing. Your husband asks the boarder about the press, and the boarder says the foreman has been keeping them past 6 without extra. And your husband makes the noise he makes about foreman. The middle child wants to know if the man across the air shaft is really going to Chicago. The oldest comes in halfway through, with coal dust on her sleeves and half a pocketful of it, and eats standing up. And you decide again not to have the conversation about where she gets it. Then the plates come off. This is the hinge of the evening, and it happens without ceremony. The boarder takes his coffee to the front room and sits on the floor with his back against the wall and writes his letter, because tomorrow is the last day of the month, and the money order goes with it. Your husband turns his chair and takes off his coat and rolls his sleeves. The children who are not asleep are put to the small tasks first, the ones that go by touch. And you fetch the lamp. The lamp is kerosene, and it costs what it costs, and you turn it up only as far as the work requires, and not 1 degree further, so that the room is bright at the table and gone at the edges. Everything outside that circle stops existing for the next 3 hours. The bed, the stove, the drawer with the sleeping child in it, the front room with the young man's pen scratching. All of it goes dark, and the table comes forward, and the bundle comes back out, and the day's second shift begins. Your husband has been making cigars since 7 in the morning, and will now work with his hands until 11. You have been awake since 4:30, and will work with your hands until 11. Nobody remarks on this. Nobody frames it. It is simply what the hours after supper are for, and the sound of it, once it settles, is not unpleasant at all. Cloth, scissors, the little regular tick of the lamp, somebody 2 floors up learning a song badly on a fiddle. The fiddle upstairs is the one you have learned to forgive. It is a young man from the 3rd floor front who works in a bakery and has decided, at the age of perhaps 20, that he will become a musician, and he practices in the only hour he has, which is this one. He is not good. He has been not good for 4 months, but he is faithful about it, and there is something in the repetition that has stopped being an intrusion and started being a clock. When he moves from the first tune to the second, it is about 9:30. The building at night has a whole vocabulary, and you know all of it without ever having tried to learn it. The rear tenement makes one kind of sound, and the front house makes another, and the air shaft carries both to you, whether you want them or not. A shaft 28 inches wide at its narrowest point is not a source of air so much as a chimney for noise, and every window on it is open in the warm months, so that a room becomes a kind of shared property after dark. You hear the family on the floor below settling their children. You hear a couple in the front house having the same argument they had on Tuesday, about money, conducted in low voices that carry perfectly, because low voices always do. You hear a baby who is not yours and will not be quieted for another 20 minutes, and you hear the mother walking it, the particular rhythm of a woman crossing a small room over and over with a child on her shoulder, and you know exactly what she is feeling, And you do not go and knock, because she would not want you to. From the street, there is the horse-car bell on the avenue, 2 blocks off, ringing at each stop. There is the rattle of a wagon over granite blocks. There is a man selling something late and calling it out in Yiddish, and another one answering him in German, and somewhere the flat clang of a pump handle in a yard. None of this stops. It simply thins, hour by hour, until what is left is the fiddle and the wagons and the building breathing. Here is something worth understanding about this neighborhood, because it explains the noise better than the crowding does. These streets are full of people who are 22 years old. Immigration selects for the young and the unattached. And a district like this one has an enormous population of unmarried men and women in their late teens and 20s, working long days, living in one rented corner of somebody else's apartment, with no parlor to sit in and no family evening to belong to. Their leisure has to happen somewhere, and it cannot happen at home, because they do not really have one. So it happens in public, in the street and the beer garden and the theatre and the dance hall, and it happens loudly, and it goes late. That is the engine underneath the entire cheap amusement trade of New York in this decade, and the trade is enormous. The Bowery is 8 or 9 minutes' walk from your door, and it is lit like nothing else in the district. There are theatres along it, where a seat in the gallery costs 10 or 15 cents, and the gallery is where everyone you know would sit, and the bill runs 3 hours or more, and gives you melodrama, songs, a comic turn, a dog act, a woman who sings sentimental numbers about a home nobody in the room has seen for years. There are dime museums where a quarter buys you a jumble of curiosities and a variety show at the back. There are beer gardens where a glass of lager is 5 cents and comes with a sandwich if the place is generous. And where a family, an actual family with children, can sit at a long table on a Sunday afternoon and listen to a brass band, which is not something the respectable uptown papers approve of, but is one of the few genuinely pleasant things available for the price of a loaf of bread. And there are concert saloons and dance halls, and those are for the young ones, and everybody in this building knows the difference between a place a married woman might go and a place she would not, and nobody has to have that explained. So, how often do you go? That is the honest question, and the honest answer is a few times a year. Not never. A few times a year. The theatre on the Bowery is not out of reach in the way a Fifth Avenue restaurant is out of reach. 15 cents each for you and your husband is 30 cents, and 30 cents is a day and a half of your piecework, and that is a real amount of money, but it is not an impossible one, and once in a while, a thing that is possible ought to actually be done. So there was a night in the spring, and there was a night around the New Year, and there will probably be a night in the summer when it is too hot to be in these rooms anyway, and the beer garden with the trees in it is worth the walk. What you do most nights instead costs nothing, and you are doing it right now. The newspaper on the table came in with your husband, and it is a day old, and he did not buy it. Somebody at the shop was finished with it. This is normal. A penny paper is a penny, and a penny is not much, but a paper read by one man and then passed along serves 6 households, and everybody understands that arrangement without discussing it. The penny press is only about 50 years old at this point, and it has changed what a person like you knows about the world. Before it, a newspaper cost 6 cents and was written for merchants, full of shipping notices and prices. Now there are papers for 2 cents and 1 cent, sold by boys on every corner, full of crime and politics and disasters and the doings of people uptown, written in short sentences for readers whose English is their second language and whose reading is done standing up on a streetcar. The city has dozens of them. Some of them are in German, which is the largest foreign language press in America right now by a wide margin. Some are in Yiddish, and that trade is only just beginning here, small and quarrelsome, and about to become enormous within the decade. Your husband reads aloud. He reads well, better than he speaks, because he learned to read in one language, and it gave him the trick of it for the second. The 9-year-old corrects his pronunciation about once a paragraph, which he takes with more patience than you would. This is the other thing the schools have done to this household. Your children read English better than either of you, and they read it without accent, and they are already at 9 and at 6, the household's translators. When a letter comes from the landlord's agent, the 9-year-old reads it. When there is a form, she reads it. There is a small inversion in that which nobody in this room has words for. She is a child, and she is corrected and sent to bed like a child. And she is also the person who tells you what the paper from the city says. At home, though, at this table, the language is the old one. 2 languages live in these 2 rooms, and they do not mix so much as take turns. Work and street and school are in English. Anger and comfort and prayer and the counting of money are in the other one. Which brings you to the letter. The boarder in the front room has been writing his for an hour, and he is not a fast writer, and it is 4 pages, and it will go tomorrow with a money order for something between $5 and $10. He does this every month. He has done it for 2 years. Somewhere in a village you could find on a map, if anyone had a map. His mother receives it, and a neighbor reads it to her, and part of the money buys what she needs, and part of it is put away toward a ticket. That is not sentiment. That is the actual mechanism by which this neighborhood was assembled. The great migration of these years is not organized by governments or by agents. It is organized by letters and remittances, one household at a time, each arrival working 2 years to bring over the next, the whole thing running on postage and money orders and the willingness of a 22-year-old to sleep on a floor in a stranger's front room and send his wages 3,000 miles east. You did the same, or your husband did. The passage that brought you here was paid for by somebody who had come first. You have a letter of your own, unanswered, in the tin box on the shelf, and you will answer it. And you have been saying that for 11 days. The fiddle stops. It is 11 o'clock. Your husband puts down his work without announcing that he is finished, which is his way, and stands and stretches until his back makes a sound that you have heard 10,000 times. You count the trousers. You tie the bundle. You put the scissors up where the small one cannot reach them, which she cannot, but you do it anyway. Then you turn the lamp down, and the room grows, and everything that was dark comes back. The arrangement takes about 4 minutes and requires no discussion. The 9-year-old and the 6-year-old go head to foot on the folding bed in the kitchen. The baby stays in the drawer, on the floor, out of the draught from the air shaft window. You and your husband have the back room, which has the actual bed in it, and which is the room with no window at all. The boarder has the front room and a mattress and a curtain on a wire, and he will be up and gone before any of you. 9 people sleeping within 40 feet of you. 2 of them yours by blood, 1 by rent, 6 by the accident of the building. You lie down in the dark and hear the last wagon on Orchard Street, and somebody's shutter, and the pump in the yard going once, twice, for someone getting water at 11 at night for a reason you will never know. You do not sleep. You lie there for perhaps 3 minutes with your eyes closed and your hands folded on your chest, like a woman in a painting. And then you remember the bread, and you open your eyes in the dark and look at the ceiling you cannot see. And you know that you are going to have to get up. So you get up. The floor is cold through your stocking. You move by memory, because the geography of 2 rooms is written into your feet by now, and you could cross this apartment blindfolded and never touch a corner. The flour is in the tin on the shelf, kept off the floor because of what lives on floors in a building like this. You measure by the handful. You have not used a measuring cup in 9 years and would not trust one if you had it. Water, warm, from the kettle you left on the back of the stove for exactly this. A little of yesterday's dough, saved in a cup, sour and alive, which is what you use instead of buying yeast. You mix it in the bowl with your fingers, because a spoon is a thing to wash, and your fingers are not. Then the folding, the turning, the pressing with the heel of your hand, 8 or 9 minutes of it, in the dark, while the building settles around you. You cover the bowl with a cloth and set it near the stove, where the last of the heat still lives. And by morning it will have risen. And by 8 o'clock there will be bread, and it will have cost you about 4 cents instead of the 8 the baker on Rivington would want. That is the whole reason. 4 cents. Then the stove itself. You open the door and look at what is left, which is very little. A few coals gone the color of a dying sunset, and you rake them together into the center, and lay a single small lump of coal on top, and close the damper down until the draught is a whisper. This is called banking a fire, and it is a skill, and it is not a small one. Done right, the fire will be alive at 5:30, and you will need 1 match and 1 minute. Done wrong, the fire is dead, and you will spend 20 minutes and a quantity of kindling you do not have to spare. And the coffee will be late, and the man will leave without it, and the whole day will start behind and never catch up. You have done it wrong perhaps 4 times in 9 years. You do not intend to make it 5. The clothes go over the chair, back in the order they will be needed. His shirt on top, then his trousers, then his socks, which you darned 2 nights ago at the toe, and which will hold another month. The dinner pail sits on the table with its lid off, so it will not smell of this evening in the morning. The 9-year-old's dress, the one with the hem let down twice, goes on the seat of the chair. His boots by the door, laces loosened, because a man fumbling with laces at 5:30 will wake the baby, and a woken baby is an hour of your morning gone. None of this takes long, perhaps 11 minutes altogether. But you do it every single night, and if you laid all those 11-minute stretches end to end across a year, you would find you had spent nearly 3 full days of your life setting out other people's clothing in the dark. Here is something worth sitting with, now that the room is quiet and there is nobody to say it to. Ask what a year of this looks like, added up. And the arithmetic is stranger than it seems. Your husband brings home between $11 and $13 in a good week, and there are perhaps 40 good weeks in a year, because the cigar trade goes slack in the summer, and there is always a stretch in February when the shop cuts hours. Call it $500. Your piecework, the trousers and the finishing, adds something between $2 and $3 a week when the work comes, which is not always, and call that $120. The boarder pays $3 a week for the front room and a share of the coffee, and that is another $156, and it is the single most reliable money in this household, which is why he is here. So something near $780 in a year, assembled out of 3 or 4 streams, none of which you can depend on, and all of which you must. Against that, rent $12 a month, $144 a year, and it is going up because the whole block is going up. Coal, perhaps $30 across the winter. Food, which is the great unbounded thing, $4 to $5 a week if you are careful, and you are always careful, so call it $240. Clothing and boots and thread, and the doctor once. Insurance for the burial society, 10 cents a week each, which is not optional in the moral sense, even though nobody makes you pay it. And what is left, if the year is kind, if nobody is sick for long, if the shop does not shut, is something between $20 and $40. That is what a year of standing over a washboard and a stove and a pile of trousers produces, in surplus, at the very end. Enough to move. Not to move far. Understand what upward movement actually means here, because the histories tend to talk about it as though families rose the way water rises, smoothly and all at once. They did not. Moving up meant moving from a rear tenement to a front one, and gaining a window that looks onto a street instead of a shaft. It meant going from 4 flights to 2. It meant, eventually, and for some, crossing to a block where the rooms had 3 rooms instead of 2, where you could put the boarder somewhere that was not the room you walk through to reach the door. It meant a family 2 streets east, on Ludlow, who now have their own water tap inside the apartment, which is spoken of on this block in the tone people use for a coronation. $20 saved in a year buys you one of those steps. 2 years buys the next. A decade of it, if the decade holds, gets a family out to Brooklyn, or up to Harlem, or into a small shop of their own, with the family living behind it. And that is the story that gets told afterward. And it is a true story. It happened. It happened often enough that it was reasonable to want it. But it required the decade to hold. And you know at least 4 households in this building for whom it did not. So lie back down now, because it is nearly 11:30, and the fire is banked, and the bread is rising, and the boots are by the door. And let me say plainly what this day was, since nobody in your life is going to say it to you, and nobody in your century is going to write it down. You ran a business today. That is not a flattering way of putting it. It is simply the accurate one. You managed a supply chain with no capital and no credit except the grocer's book and your own reputation on it. You ran a manufacturing operation out of your kitchen with 3 employees, 2 of them under 10, and you tracked the piece rate in your head to the quarter cent. You did the household's purchasing in a market where every price was negotiable, and the negotiation was conducted in 3 languages. You operated the building's informal bank, lending flour and coal and small coins, holding a ledger in your memory that you have never once written down and have never once gotten wrong. You performed water haulage, laundry, food preparation, childcare, elder relations, tenant management, and quality control on finished goods, and you did it in about 600 square feet with no running water. You are, by any honest accounting, one of the more capable people in the city of New York. And here is the structure, and it is worth naming as plainly as the skill. None of it counted. The census taker, who came through this building in 1880, wrote down your husband's occupation, cigar maker, in a firm hand, and in the column beside your own name, he wrote the word for keeping house, which is a word that means nothing, and is measured in nothing, and appears in no accounting of what this city produced that year. The trousers you finished tonight will be sold uptown with the contractor's name on the label, and the manufacturer's name on the invoice, and no name at all attached to the hands. There is no wage in the world with your name on it. There is no record that will survive of the 4 cents you saved on bread tonight, or the 14,000 times you have saved it. And it is fragile in a way that no amount of skill can fix. One bad winter in the shop, one long illness, one accident on a ladder, and 10 years of $20 surpluses go in 11 weeks, and the family that was 3 steps up the stairs is back at the bottom, and the friendly visitor comes with her notebook and asks whether you have been thrifty. You were never anything but thrifty. That was never the variable. The building has gone quiet now, all of it, even the child upstairs. Your husband is asleep with his arm across his eyes the way he does. The border is a shape behind a curtain. The bread is rising in the dark by the stove, slowly doing its work without you for the first time in 17 hours. Down in the yard, somebody works the pump handle once, and then again. And then the water comes, and you hear it fall into a bucket, and you hear the footsteps cross the stones, and then a door, and then nothing. And the room goes quiet, and stays quiet, and you sleep.